Hey students, it's Miss Shofity here. I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about immigration. So we're going to look at this PowerPoint together. It's basically talking about new immigration, which is at the turn of the century. So that's turn of the century from the 1800s, the end of the 1800s into the 1900s. When we talk about new immigration compared to old immigration, I'll give you some comparisons. But this is what we're talking about since we're talking about Ellis Island and also Angel Island. And there were definitely other detention and immigration facilities. But, these are probably the most well-known, Ellis Island and Angel Island. So we're going to start with new immigrants to America. Like I said, these are the immigrants that came around the end of the 1800s into the 1900s. So before the Civil War, this slide is talking about old immigration. So before the Civil War, most immigrants came from Ireland, England, Germany, and Scandinavian countries. So you can see, if you don't know what Scandinavia is, it's basically Sweden, Finland, Iceland. You can see Iceland over here, and Norway. So those are kind of Scandinavian countries. But this is before the Civil War, that most what they refer to as old immigrants came from these countries primarily. After the Civil War, so these are the immigrants that we refer to as the new immigrants. They came from other countries like Eastern European countries. They came from Italy, Greece, Turkey, Poland, Russia. So Southern European countries and also Eastern European countries. And one of the main differences between old immigrants and new immigrants is obviously where they came from, but also the way they looked. Now, some of the immigrants were definitely able to assimilate. Assimilation is one of your key terms for this chapter. They were able to assimilate more easily because they looked not so different. But the new immigrants that definitely looked different from the old immigrants had a much more difficult time actually being accepted and assimilating into the United States. So there are two terms that refer to immigration. This can be immigration way back then. This can be immigration now. This can even be going from one state to another state. And it can even be going from one town to another town. But mainly, during our discussion about immigration, this is going to be going from one country to another country. So some of the push factors, which meant these things were pushing people out of their country. Some push factors are things that make someone leave their country to come to, in this case, America or the United States. So examples of push factors would be if there were certain groups of people, religious or ethnic groups of people who were experiencing oppression. So meaning like they were getting treated poorly by other people in their country and or their government. Also, another push factor is this: bad economy. If they're experiencing a very poor, bad economy in their country, they may need to look elsewhere to live. If they don't have jobs, then they may need to go somewhere else where they might be able to get jobs. So those are just a couple of push factors, things that make a person or a family leave their country, and in this case, come to the United States. Another term that is used for immigration is called a pull factor. So a pull factor is the opposite of a push factor. A pull factor is something that makes people want to come to the United States. So things that attract people to the United States. And at that point, one of the biggest things that attracted people to the United States was the promise of jobs. So if they were specifically suffering from a poor economy in their old country, then they may have been hearing that, hey, the United States has lots of jobs, let's move there. And so promise of jobs is just one example. There are other examples, but promise of jobs or a better life in general, better opportunities for your children, things like that, those are all pull factors. Ethnic neighborhoods, and we're going to explore this a bit more in just a few minutes, but ethnic neighborhoods were neighborhoods in some of these larger cities in the United States, like New York, San Francisco, Philadelphia, Boston. Ethnic neighborhoods were neighborhoods in which immigrants would settle, and they liked to be around other people that were similar to them. So, for example, there is a very well-known place in New York City called Little Italy, and it was an ethnic neighborhood for people who were from Italy. They were Italian. So something that made them feel very comfortable was being around other Italians, especially because they didn't speak English right away, obviously. So they felt better being around people who spoke Italian, who were the same religion that they were, maybe that were from their own villages in Italy, and they're from their own towns in Italy. But it made them feel safe, and it made them feel like they were back in their own country, even though they knew they weren't. So ethnic neighborhoods like Little Italy, and other cities have their own Little Italy. It doesn't have to be just New York City. They felt comfortable being around people who were similar to them. And in some cases, it was also easier to get jobs if you were dealing with people who were of your same, ethnicity, or from your same race. So, if they had been experiencing any nativism, that's another one of your chapter 11 words, nativism. That is, prejudice or discrimination against those who are foreign born or born in another country. If they were experiencing any discrimination that was part of nativism, then they definitely wanted to be around people who were like them, and being around people who held the same values, and ultimately, could give them jobs, because it was very, very normal to see a sign in a window that said, help wanted, but then under that it would say, Italians do not apply, or Poles, people from Poland, do not apply. Nativism from, that point of view was not against the law, and it was practiced very, very often. So, an example, all Polish people would live together in a neighborhood. just so that they would feel like they were back in, their old country, with people that had similar language, that looked like they did, that could possibly give them jobs, that had the same religion. So this is kind of the idea of ethnic neighborhoods, being near people that are like you. One particular people of, certain countries that were more discriminated against, depending on, where they lived, were the Chinese immigrants. The Chinese, obviously, their language was very different. Their religion was usually very different than the old immigrants who had been here for a long time. And they looked very different. So they faced a lot of discrimination. And there was even something called the Chinese Exclusion Act, which barred people from China to move to the United States. And, that was an actual piece of legislation. It was a law that said it's okay if we deny these people access to the United States. And, there was a lot of nativism practiced on Chinese immigrants. But they did face oppression, and it was very hard for them to overcome that oppression, but they did. All right, so I want to stop sharing this for just a second, and I want to go to talk to a little bit more about ethnic neighborhoods. So like I said, ethnic neighborhoods, you can still go to any large city and see ethnic neighborhoods. In the Northeast, in like places like Chicago and California. But you can also see kind of new ethnic neighborhoods. So if you go into a large city and you're just driving around, you'll start to notice some of the ethnic neighborhoods because if you look here in this picture, you see a lot of signs, but they're not in English. They're in the language of that ethnic neighborhood. So that's one thing that you can see in old ethnic neighborhoods that we were talking about, at the turn of the century. But you can also see them now. You see that this is a more modern picture, but there are still ethnic neighborhoods in a lot of large cities. So, for example, there's a really good ethnic neighborhood that has great food in Philadelphia, and it's just a Chinese ethnic neighborhood. They have wonderful food, but you will see the signage is in Chinese. So when you are traveling, maybe not now because coronavirus, but when you are traveling and you're driving through or walking through some of these ethnic neighborhoods, pay particular attention. You can see signs that, or even like down here in this lower left-hand picture, you see the American flag, but you also see flags from whatever that ethnicity or whatever that ethnic neighborhood is celebrating. So in this case, it would be Italian, the Italian flag. So again, it doesn't have to just be that we were talking about old ethnic neighborhoods from the turn of the century. These are all very modern pictures that you can go to any large city and see ethnic neighborhoods even now. So I just wanted to take a few minutes and talk to you about new immigrants versus old immigrants, ethnic neighborhoods, assimilation. So that is being able to assimilate or fit in to a new place that you move to. And that can mean like learning the language. In this case, when they moved to the United States, learning English was a sign of assimilation. Getting a job was a sign of assimilation. So I wanted to talk to you guys about assimilation and then also nativism. How nativism was very discriminatory and a prejudiced practice that, made it harder for immigrants to assimilate into their new country. So I hope you guys have a great day, and we'll see you soon.